This is the story of my grandmother and my grandfather in World War II and the amazing things that they did during and after the war and how they were able to come together as a family and survive that tragic time in history. I have some photos that I've collected since I started this project. I wrote around to all of my relatives who are still living in England, which is where my family originates, and was sent a lot of these photographs. I did photocopy them and paste them onto the poster so that I wasn't damaging the photographs. The top photograph is of my grandfather and my grand uncle, my mother's brother. I'm not sure who the third gentleman is at the top. My grandfather and my grandmother met in England while my grandfather was at boarding school, and he used to run away from boarding school every day or every night, and because they didn't give him enough to eat, he would drink milk directly from the udder of a goat, scale the wall of the farm, and run back to school. The story goes, according to my grandmother, that they met when my grandfather fell off the wall and scraped his knee very badly. He was about 5 years old at the time, and my grandmother was 7. My grandmother helped him get off, dusted him off, made him stop crying, and helped him get back to the boarding school before anyone noticed he was gone. They lived in the same area their whole childhood, so they kept in contact with one another, and eventually, as the war broke out, they were engaged. My grandfather during the war was a member of the Royal Air Force, but he operated the aircraft carriers, which is a very unique position as the Great Britain fleet did not have very many aircraft carriers like the United States. My grandfather took many photographs. He was a very prolific photographer, and he seems to be very interested in plane crashes. Almost all of the pictures that I have here are of plane crashes and how people were dealing with them on the aircraft carriers and on the ground. My grandfather would tell me 2 stories from the war. The first one was that he was actually trained as a pilot initially because he was a member of the Royal Air Force, and he was shot down 2 times on missions over to Germany across the Berlin Wall, captured and escaped. In England, they like to make light of tragic events, and thus, if you are shot down and survive to come back to your Air Force company, you are called a guinea pig. My grandfather has the unique distinction of being the only double guinea pig, they call it, that we know of in the Royal Air Force. So he was shot down twice and survived twice. His plane, incidentally, was plane number 13, and for the rest of his life, he believed that 13 was a lucky number because, after all, he lived. As the war ended, my grandfather's aircraft carrier was docked right next to the aircraft carrier, I believe it's the USS Arizona, where the Japanese signed the treaty that ended World War II, and these are pictures that were taken by my grandfather that were heavily censored. On the back of the photos, they have "do not send through the mail," all kinds of scary stuff of the actual signing of the Japanese surrender. And that's something that is very precious to my family, and I was so glad to get those from my great uncle. My grandmother also had a very interesting role in the war. I was always really enamored in her role in the war because she was such a proper British woman, and I could just never imagine her taking part in something like that. She never wore pants, and when I was younger, I did not want to wear pants either. And I remember screaming to my mother, "Why do I have to wear pants?" Bibi, that's what I called her, for Beryl, didn't wear pants either. And my grandmother said, "Well, I did used to have to wear pants. I had to wear pants on the tank." And that didn't really sink in until a few years ago. I started having memories of my childhood, and that would come back to me, was that her response to me was she didn't have to wear pants because she wore pants on a tank. So I thought, what tank? I called her up, and she told me that She was stationed in Sussex, and she worked for the companies that produced the tanks that were driven in World War II and on the French line. She was stationed in Sussex, and her job, because she knew the area so well and grew up there, was a very, very good map reader, anybody will tell you, was to direct the tank drivers down the roads from Sussex, which is a manufacturing area in England, to the White Cliffs of Dover, which was the main departure point for the tanks and major artillery to be taken over to the front. They would cross the channel and end up on the beaches in France. My grandmother and my grandfather both were very lucky in World War II to have survived it and to have left me with beautiful photographs and very, very unique stories.